Hi, this is Dave Douglas, and this is the Greenleaf Music Podcast, A Noise from the Deep. That's Steve Lehman's music. I got to talk to Steve by Skype about his music and life, and I haven't done remote conversations in a long time for this podcast, so the audio quality is not quite as good as some of the others. I'm hoping you'll enjoy the content, and if you do want to recommend a better Skype recording app, please do. Podcast at greenleafmusic.com. Hope you enjoy this one. If I could do it on Skype, it would open up a whole new world of musicians I could talk to in this space, so do let me know. A lot of Steve's music can be found on Pi recordings, including his powerful and influential octet work, as well as his recent quartet recording, The People I Love. I talked to him about his interest in music, including what led him to invoke ideas coming out of French spectralism, both in his playing and in his composing. It's had an impact on his thinking in melodically, harmonically, and rhythmically exciting ways. I think you'll find it interesting. Again, write to me about the show at podcast@Greenleaf Music. Rate and review it at Apple Music. It helps people find the show. In addition, you could really support the show by becoming a part of our community at Greenleaf Music, by subscribing at greenleafmusic.com, and support all the artists and all the activity here at the label. Thanks so much. Please join us and enjoy this episode with Steve Lehman.
Steve.
Yes, sir.
Steve. We're laughing because we're connected by Skype and there's just like strange bumps and noises, but hopefully in the recording you'll be able to enjoy it, especially Steve's music, but also everything that Steve has to say. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're in Los Angeles, right?
I am. I'm in Los Angeles.
So we were listening to Chimera Lucchini from the Octet album, Mise en Abîme.
Nice.
French,
nicely done.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I was up early this morning practicing French. But I guess, like, I'm just going to start with the elephant in the room.
Sure.
That, first of all, there's a whole intonation thing going on with the vibraphone in that piece.
Right.
And, I know I've talked to you about where this is coming from and what the techniques and theories and practices are. But, is this a thing that you would say comes out of spectralism, or is there something else going on with the intonation there?
Yeah, I think it's pretty safe as far as just me personally as a musician and composer and player. As far as all that's concerned, it's pretty fair to tie it to this kind of way of working with music referred to as spectralism, or even more specifically, the sort of French spectral school, because like a lot of it, everyone kind of wants to protect their piece of the rock. So sometimes it's good to spectral music means different things to different people, but French spectral music, that's pretty specific. It kind of, the sort of sound world of that piece, Chimera Lucchini, and the opening passages, opening section in particular, is sort of a result of a kind of real fascination and passion that I had for orchestral and chamber music by people like Tristan Murail and Gerard Grisey, and a few others. I got to study pretty closely with Tristan Murail for about 5 years while I was getting my aforementioned doctorate in composition, and that really helped me kind of get a better understanding of kind of how spectral music works, what the priorities are, kind of the nuts and bolts of it, and the sort of changing in tunings. That's sort of a manifestation of just sort of thinking about combining notes, combining pitches, creating chords, creating harmonies, thinking maybe a little bit more about frequency relationships and less about intervals, and thinking what kind of frequencies, what kind of relationships of, if you have a sound that's sounding at around 100 hertz, what kind of other sonorities are going to kind of mesh easily with that sound based on sort of a frequency analysis, as opposed to that's a C sharp. And I think those two perspectives on sort of dissonance and consonance and harmony, they're not totally orthogonal. They have quite a bit of overlap. But if you're lucky, it does kind of help you discover some different perspectives on how to create harmonies and harmonic progressions and all that kind of stuff. So some of that is at play in that piece.
What does orthogonal mean?
Oh, it just it's kind of.
I mean, I would look it up, but you're sitting right there. So
I am. I think it means sort of two. It's really refers to sort of two sort of things that are totally adjacent to each other and don't overlap in any way. And it could be, so I'm sort of using it there as a kind of physical metaphor. Yeah.
So, but the way that these, what I think of as microtonal sounds or extensions of pitch come about from this process of thinking in terms of frequency numbers and using numerical processes to make decisions about what's happening with frequencies.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you're working with music. In a way, it's hard to avoid numbers on some level. So it's kind of, it's just kind of, I think maybe thinking of frequency instead of intervals, that's the easiest way to think about spectral music as far as harmony works. There's implications on rhythm and orchestration and melody and timbre that kind of go along with spectral music as well. Kind of thinking of frequency relationships and then also just the way we hear. So, most listeners aren't able to discriminate the difference between, 200 hertz and 202 hertz. So there's a kind of, in terms of like audition and the way people hear, you only need sort of a certain amount of accuracy to sort of create the phenomenon in somebody's ear of certain relationships between frequencies. Sometimes if it's music that's sort of drone based or that doesn't have any harmonic movement, people get incredibly precise in terms of how they can discriminate between two frequencies that are very close to one another. But once it seems like once you get any kind of root movement or moving sort of referential pitch or harmonic rhythm, that all goes out the window, and people can't really discriminate beyond like a quarter tone between pitches. So
first of all, so how is it created on the vibraphone? Is that electronically enhanced?
No, I bought a set of vibraphone bars and had some of the bars retuned by this guy Gilberto Serna in Chicago, who's kind of a master mallet percussion. What's the word? Luthier. I guess luthier is not the right word, but just kind of craftsman. And so he retuned certain bars for me.
Wow.
And the vibraphone is nice because, I don't know if when you retune strings on a piano, it sort of affects every string on the piano because of the resonance. So you kind of end up with this static pitch field where even if you play one of the notes that hasn't been retuned, you kind of hear it. You hear that the piano has been
Something's
retuned.
going on.
Yeah.
Right. It's
And
different than a standard tuning.
That's right. And that's not the case with the vibraphone. So so it kind of freed me up in some ways, just sort of those physical realities.
So it was a normal number of bars in the vibraphone. It's just that some percentage of them were altered as to pitch.
Yes.
In order to fit the frequency concepts that you were working with in the piece itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then Chris Dingman was able to play that and sort of, use your notation to bring in, what we might call, not well-tempered pitches.
Sure. Yeah.
Ill-tempered clavier.
That's right. Yeah, so he's just reading, really, in that case of that piece, he's just reading regular vibraphone notation, but he just knows that
the bars are
and it's all the A's, all the C sharps, and all the F's are tuned up a quarter tone. And then, of course, I can ask the trumpet or the saxophones or the trombone to play different tunings as well. But for the vibraphone to do it, you sort of have to retune the bars.
It has to be prepared in advance.
Yeah, right.
So when you ask, it's Jonathan Finlayson and Mark Shim and Tim Albright. When you ask them, what was the phrase you just used? Well, I mean, to play what we shorthand call microtones.
Sure.
How specific do you get as to the number of cents? Like what we think of as a half step is 100 cents, right? So there's 100 in that, according to that scale, there's 100 gradations between C and C sharp.
Right.
And so if you were to say to Jonathan Finlayson, I want this to be, rather than, let's use A 440, so how much higher do you want them to be, or is it just sort of like half sharp?
Yeah, I just use quarter sharp is the smallest gradation. So I just would say A quarter sharp, or B3, A 3/4 sharp, or B quarter flat. Right. That means around 50 cents between the two chromatic pitches, but sort of like we were talking
too.
Yes, yeah. Well, depending on who you ask.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. He seems to be in there somewhere. So kind of like we were saying before, when you're in a context that where there's a lot of harmonic movement and root movement, I don't really think there's much of a case to be made that you need to get into the specificity of 30 cents versus 60 cents, because it's just not. I don't think it's really how.
But it's
the perception works.
Sure.
Yeah,
I agree about that. Yeah. But I also I'm asking, I guess, because of the notion that you're working with multiples of frequencies and the math aspect of the composition process.
Well, it's one of those things, I don't want to overemphasize that, like when Miles and Wayne Shorter play in octaves, they're not playing in a perfect 2-to-1 ratio, but they're playing in octaves because that's how our ear works. You just round it, and as long as it's in the zone, you hear an octave, and it's sort of as simple as that. And the same thing goes for other frequential relationships. So that's why you don't really need to.
Do you think that I'm sure you've done research on this, but that a listener rounds up? That like you're saying, when you hear two horns play together, if they're not perfectly in tune, we our own inner ear just sort of corrects it and go, oh, they're playing unison.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have researched that. I think the short answer is that people tend to look for the easiest solution that they can find. So if they can round up or round down and make it something coherent as far as pitches or rhythms are concerned, that's what they do. But there's also a kind of threshold beyond which point it becomes, very difficult / impossible to hear, two pitches as an octave.
Do you think that the way that you're using these techniques is sort of a way to cross that threshold beyond which somebody could round it up or down? You're like, it has to be heard as something different than that.
No, because I'm inside that threshold. It's a sort of a well-known threshold of for people that deal with music cognition and music perception of pitch discrimination, and the threshold is a quarter tone. For about a quarter tone, and what they call the critical band in terms of like your inner listening, like kind of frequency discrimination apparatus. It's about a quarter tone. And after that, it becomes, once you get more discriminate than that, people can't really tell the difference. Now, as I said, that goes out the window if you have like drone-based music where there's a constant reference point. Then people that threshold is very tiny. So I don't know if I can't remember if you've had Amir El Safar on the podcast, but he's somebody that can discriminate extremely fine degrees of difference in frequency. But I think that's sort of predicated on a context where there's a sort of fixed reference point. But I don't know.
And very often there's a scale that has certain notes that have to be played a certain way, like in Indian music or in maqam. And it's difficult for people who have not been deeply immersed in the language to get it right.
Yeah.
I have tried to play some of that, and every time I would play one of the sweet notes, and I would see Ibrahim Malouf's face just grimacing a little bit. Well, it's so hard to slot it perfectly.
Hard. Yeah.
So, but that brings me to something I wanted to ask you about. I mean, we were talking about the compositional project, but you're also this project of playing using this language. And so I thought I would just play some of your solo from the piece we were excerpting before. Steve Lehman, Tyshawn Sorey, Drew Gress, Jose Davila, Chris Dingman.
Yeah.
So we were talking about, the techniques that you use to compose this music, and then the way that you're playing on it seems to me of a piece.
Well, 100%. I mean, it's funny because the saxophone solo enters into the piece when we've sort of transitioned to a sort of arrangement of an arrangement. It's arrangement of this hip hop track called Lucchini, which is a sort of arrangement of, I think the song is called Adventures in the Land of Music, and the band is called Dynasty. I think, but I might have that switched, but I think that's what it is. So that part of the tune, actually, there's no altered tunings of any kind. It's pretty much sort of like straightforward Western harmony and its extensions. However, there's plenty of other pieces where, as a soloist, you kind of have to engage with a kind of harmonic setting that involves, I guess, non-standard tunings. So, I'm sort of two minds about it. I've certainly spent a lot of time, a good amount of time getting familiar with, there's basically just fingerings on most woodwind instruments that sort of allow you to access sort of the notes between the notes or quarter tones. So I've spent a lot of time trying to internalize that and sort of add it to what I do as a saxophonist. But at the same time, music that I write and people that I try to collaborate with, improvisers that I try to collaborate with, what I do is very specialized. So it's sort of, I think like a lot of us, find people that have overlapping musical interests in general, which is kind of makes sense. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to kind of make it so specific, like, well, you can't take it solo on this music unless you, as a saxophonist, unless you've mastered all the microtonal fingerings, or as a trumpet player, unless that's sort of like at the center of what you do. Because it just seems a little too restrictive, and it doesn't really bear out musically either, because people can sort of, all the great musicians we work with can kind of use their ears and find their way into the music in ways that are really compelling, without necessarily using quarter tone fingerings, which is something that makes me happy, actually, and sort of goes all the way back to this idea that, spectral harmony, traditional Western harmony, there's quite a bit of overlap there in terms of the sort of underlying principles. They diverge in some important ways too, but there's a lot of the foundations of what we think of as traditional Western harmony are rooted in a lot of the same foundations of spectral harmony and frequential relationships. Right. So I don't know. Right. That's something that's helped me, have somebody, have Mark Shim, have anybody, take a solo.
Yeah. Any great improviser finds a way to make themselves comfortable in any world in their own voice.
That's right. That's
the idea of writing for the improvisers, right?
That's right.
But I also think, to be more specific to your own playing, you've developed a lot of things through thinking about this overlay of the spectrum and the implications for your own musicianship as a performer.
Well, for sure. And, it's interesting. It's one of these things, like, I first got into sort of like alternate fingerings and quarter tone fingerings on the instrument because I was just like via Coltrane, essentially, and like hearing him play and using a lot of false fingerings, and other saxophonists too, but I associate it with him because it's such a big chunk of listening that I have done and continue to do. But just, the way he would use false fingerings on the saxophone in, lines that he would play or linear things he were doing. And sometimes it would just sound really cool to hear a change in timbre. Sometimes it would allow him to articulate the same note 2 times in a row really cleanly in a way that maybe he couldn't have done if he wasn't using a false fingering. Any number of things. So
yes, you're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah. You know all about it. And
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And so I was like, man, this sounds so awesome. And, Jackie McLean, Gary Bartz, other alto players where I would hear really, I think sort of inspired by him, I always sort of assumed integrating that into their playing. And so I started to kind of try to be systematic about it and see, like, what are all the different false fingerings that I could use, and like, what are the good ones that I can use, like really use in the heat of the moment, not something that ergonomically is really awkward, but technically, I need something I can use kind of in real time. And as I started going through my instrument, kind of trying to get comfortable, get acquainted with those, I realized, wait a minute, this one's actually changing the pitch, like beyond that threshold. Like, wait a minute, this isn't an A anymore. This is like something else. This is almost A sharp, or it's whatever, or it's So that kind of was like, oh, some of these are actually changing the tuning. And then I worked with a guy and took a couple lessons with this great classical sort of new music specialist saxophonist, Claude Delangle, in Paris, and asked him, I said, how do you learn all these, these fingerings and tunings? And he said, oh, it's easy. I'll give you a PDF. So he just gave me emailed me a little couple sheets that show all the fingerings on the alto saxophone for how you get these other pitches. And then, it was kind of up to me to I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, honestly. I just sort of knew I liked the sound of it and thought maybe it would open some stuff up for me, which I think it did, just in and of itself. And then later, as I got kind of more involved in this sort of endeavor of seeing like, wow, I wonder if spectral harmony or approach the kind of psychology of spectral music could work as like a really compelling foundation framework for improvised music. It sort of connected that work I had been doing on the instrument in a really really nice way.
And also it sounds like in an organic way, that it came to you first as something that you liked as a player, and then found your way into developing, and then led you to this more, I don't want to, theoretical maybe is the wrong word, but an overlay that had other implications for your composing.
Yeah, it has felt pretty organic to me. It's just one of those things that it's like you said, it was really just like the sound of the music and sound of things I wanted to hear on the horn that kind of led me this way. And then, also as I've gone, like, sort of, I don't know, looked for historical precedents or looked again at kind of, musicians that have inspired me from the jazz tradition, I'm able to see more clearly that, a kind of somewhat long precedent for this, or people's shoulders that I'm standing on that maybe didn't articulate the ideas in the same way, but that's like, oh man, this is crazy. Like here's this interview of Charlie Parker saying he loves Varese, who's sort of widely considered to be a proto-spectral, sort of precursor, I guess, to the French spectral movement. And not only does he love his music, which is unusual in, the early 50s, but he's planning to move to Paris and study composition with him, like at the Paris Conservatory. That stuff like that, where like, it's not just like a myth. It's like you see an interview of him actually articulating this. It's like, wow.
Why is Varese considered a proto-spectralist?
That's a good question. I think for a lot of
I'm asking these huge questions.
No. There's a complex answer there for sure, but I think in the short answer is that because he seems to be more interested in dealing with like sonorities and sort of as opposed to like traditional chords or
pitch relationships.
Right, relationships. More about sonorities, and it's a beginning of sort of looking at harmony and timbre as sort of like two sides of the same coin, maybe, where it's like
interesting.
A timbre is really a collection of a bunch of different pitches, and a harmony is too. There's differences, but sort of, a lot of people think of, and I can think of some pieces of Varese, certainly, where I'm like, wow, it's like, it's sort of a sound, but it's also a chord. It's kind of, he's the early person to work in that way.
Thinking about those relationships. Who first used the word spectral?
Well, I think that term was coined by to describe a certain way of working with music in the, I guess, early 1970s by this I think he's Belgian composer named Hugues Dufort. Well done. Well, I speak French fluently, which was another thing when somebody was like, you should check out these French spectral composers. I was like, oh, I can do that, because a lot of the interviews and writing about their music, even today, but especially 15 years ago, most of it was in French, so that helped me. But this guy, the English pronunciation would be Hugh Dufour. So he's sort of associated with that, and I think he's the one who used the term spectral.
And does it relate to what we think of as the spectrum in terms of light?
Yeah.
So it's thinking about frequency and those relationships that way.
Yeah, like the harmonic spectrum would be like on acoustic instruments where all the overtones are harmonics, but then if you, I don't know, clank on a gong or a bell or on the side of a mug or something, it's all the overtones they're inharmonic actually.
Right.
So it's the spectrum of sounds. And then later, of course, nobody likes a label. So then later, a lot of those composers sort of said, spectral, it's not really good enough because there's a lot of people interested in timbre. So we got to come up with something more specific than that. But yeah, this guy.
Okay. I know you could call it bebop. That hasn't been used.
Yes, I know. That's a lot of pushback on that term as well.
Oh boy. Yeah. No, you're right. Nobody likes a label, and it's difficult. But at the same time, the composers you're talking about, there is I would say an identifiable sound, and what you're doing with the music, of course, is very different and brings in lots of different elements.
Right.
I want to get quickly to your new record because we've been talking about this for a while, but just to, in the work that you're currently doing, I know that all of these interests and many other interests are a part of it, but do you feel like at this point you sort of need computers to help you actualize the musical ideas that you're thinking about?
That's a good question. For some of it, it's nice to it's nice to have a computer to hear, certain harmonies, certain chords, certain groupings of notes, especially if it gets beyond like 4 or 5 notes. It's nice to have a little rough reference point to kind of hear how that's going to manifest. I try as much as I can. I'd say for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been trying to compose away from the computer, at least for the first several sort of iterations, because I don't know, I'm very handy with Finale. I'm very good with Finale, I feel like I'm very familiar with what it does well and what it doesn't do very well. And it doesn't deal with timbre very well. It doesn't deal with dynamics, like a sort of dynamic shape that you or I might be able to, like something that goes like, like something that has like some real inner life would take you like 30 minutes to do in Finale to just to get it to look right or get it to sound right.
But what about pitch?
Yeah, well, so for like hearing like combinations of chords and stuff like that or pitches, it's good. It's good for that. But I think a lot of that I can sort of imagine in my head. But so I do both. But I don't know. I think probably there are some aspects of what I do where the computer is a pretty important piece of the puzzle. And
I was thinking like computationally. More than notation, more like I hate to say running the numbers, but these extremely sophisticated gradations of frequency must get pretty complex.
It can
mathematically.
It can. There's some computation stuff where it's just easy. It's easier to plug it in and say, I wonder what would happen to this note if I did this or whatever. Right. So it's for that kind of stuff, and a lot of like Tristan Murail, Gerard Grisey, a lot of their approach to composition coincides with some pretty significant technological breakthroughs in the early 70s. So it's not totally, it's definitely not a coincidence.
work that was done at EarCam and places like that. And
yeah, for those guys, a lot of it was. Although, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's funny. Like when their early work was very much not. I don't want to say it's unlike a jazz group, but it was very do it yourself, play their own pieces, deal with your own electronics, load everything into a van, and go do a concert somewhere. And just sort of deal with whatever constraints of infrastructure you have to deal with. And then pretty quickly after that, they got closely associated with EarCam and had access to, great resources, institutional resources, and that sort of is manifest in the music. But yeah, it's definitely that stuff is tied together. Role of technology and those particular approaches to music. They're linked.
Wow. It's incredibly fascinating, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah,
and there's so much there, and I'm going to go back and listen to those early pieces. You're talking about Gerard Grisey and Tristan Morai. Would you say that like Pierre Schaeffer was someone who maybe he predates them a little bit, but not really involved in the same pursuit? Or Pierre Henry?
I don't know. Yeah, those music concrete guys, I don't know. I don't really know.
It's sort of a different animal, I guess. I mean,
depending on who you ask, I think maybe specifically because I don't know too much about those guys composing. It's mostly like tape and purely electronic pieces, and not so much for chamber or orchestral settings. So I think I'd more think of them as being associated with kind of music concrete. But
a lot of the important post-war composers like Ligeti, Stockhausen and Boulez and tons of others had a phase of electronic music, purely electronic music, right around that time, late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, and that's true. That sort of was the way it worked, and Xenakis and all those guys. And I think maybe that's the idea too. Is so the Grisey and Murai sort of come around like late 60s, early 70s. So it's almost 20 years later. But yeah, Ligeti, Lontano, and Atmospheres, that's definitely in there. And Stockhausen has a lot of stuff really looking at timbre and frequency relationships very closely, like this piece, Stimmung. So, it's like everybody's always standing on somebody's shoulders in one way or another, whether they like it or not.
That's for sure. Yeah. Okay, so there's no way to make an elegant segue here. So I'm just going to start talking about your new record.
That's fine.
Which I love. It's called The People I Love. And we'll hear a little bit of the opening piece, Prelude. So Prelude, it's an extension of your long relationship with Craig Taborn on piano,
right?
With whom you've developed a lot of these ideas. And then, of course, the rest of the band is Matt Brewer on bass and Damian Reed on drums. But we've been talking about the French spectralists and all of these concepts. And of course, now I'll probably hear that in everything for the rest of the day, but I'm hearing it in that piece.
Nice.
And I'm wondering, is that now maybe something sublimated by a larger project that you're after with this record?
I think that stuff is like the stuff we've been talking about, and sort of the influence of, people like Murail and Grisey on just the way I think about sound in general. I think it's still in there quite a bit in this album, but it's probably not foregrounded, certainly to the same extent as it is on like the 2 octet records I did. But yeah, like that opening track with Craig, I mean, it's this is all music. He's such a voracious listener. It's all stuff, everything we've been talking about is stuff that he's pretty intimately familiar with as well. So we can kind of draw on thinking about timbre, thinking about, different tunings and how you address that or deal with that on the piano, on a piano that hasn't been prepared or detuned.
Right.
There's another track on the album, Echoes, that was originally recorded on my first octet record, and is a pretty clear example of sort of using the harmonic series as sort of a reference for creating sort of detuned harmonies. And so on this record, we sort of reinterpret it and try to use the piano to sort of access some of those sonorities. All that said, I mean, this album, I wouldn't call it a no concept album, but it was really like been working with my trio for, a little over 10 years. And I felt like it was time to document what we've been working on and take a snapshot of it, because I'm really proud of it. And it also seemed like a good opportunity to kind of invite a guest to sort of engage with us and see if that would even help us discover a new side of what we do. That was really the sort of genesis of it. And then, of course, when you end up with a kind of quartet of saxophone, bass, alto saxophone, piano, bass, and drums, of course, I have my own personal sort of canon for, that instrumentation that probably not surprisingly includes Charlie Parker. It's like playing in that instrumentation, and Anthony Braxton and Kenny Garrett and Jackie McLean, probably a few others I'm not thinking
Steve
of right
Coleman,
now.
I would think might be somebody that you listen to.
Well, he is somebody, I've checked out his music. I don't know if he's recorded that much in that setting, like just piano, bass, and drums and saxophone. I can't think of a record off the top of my head. There might be one that I missed. But Greg Osby, that would be one. He's definitely recorded in that format quite a bit, and he's a big point of reference for me. And Steve is too. I mean, just getting to know him over the years and his work ethic and all that stuff. But yeah, so that all that is, so it's kind of like thinking of that, but also trying to contribute something and do it in our own way.
Well, it's nice to have a band, like you say. You've been together a long time, and that brings a lot of special things that you can write, but also things that just happen spontaneously.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's this other track that I wanted to play. I'm gonna let you finish. The track, it starts with this word. It's IH, which I don't know how to pronounce. How do you say the name of this piece?
It's so stupid. That's my 2 kids' names spelled backwards. So E column is Maliki, spelled backwards, but kind of split into 2 words. And then my daughter's name is Sunny. So that ends up looking like sort of like Eunice. So I usually just say E column and Eunice, but there's no sort of technically correct
listeners. Yeah, they can pronounce it however they want.
Pronounce it however you want.
Here's the music. So it's E column and Enos, and it's this, you know, in this one there's this whole rhythmic overlay thing going on.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. There's what's going on with that. There's sort of a lot of that particular piece is sort of an outgrowth of a lot of work that I've done over the years with Vijay Iyer and Taishan Sori in this group Fieldwork, this collective group we've had together for a long time. And, you know, I learned so much out of working with those guys, and it was challenged so much rhythmically in so many different ways. This piece kind of deals with rhythmic relationships and sort of the way that they can kind of morph into one another. So without getting too nerdy, I guess that opening track starts with the right hand of the piano playing attacks like in groupings of 5/16 notes. So every 5/16 notes, there's another kind of attack in the right hand. And in the left hand, the attacks happen every 8/16 notes or every half note. And so you sort of hear that relationship, and there's a little maneuvering to make it line up sort of every so often. And then that sort of relationship of 8/16 notes to 5/16 notes later in the piece changes to a relationship of 5 to 3. But the sort of clock time, so let's say the 8/16 notes take about 2 seconds and the 5/16 notes take, you know, 5/8 of that, whatever that is. I guess that's 4 is half, so 62% or something like that. So that same sort of proportion is carried on to different sort of tempo modulations that happen across the piece. And it's just sort of used as kind of the basis to, you know, kind of see if that's going to be a sort of meaningful context for improvisation and group interaction and us playing together. And then there's sort of harmonic stuff that sort of echoes that's going on as well. But yeah, that's sort of what's going on in that piece. And I try, you know, when I'm writing music that's really meant to privilege improvisation and work with improvisers, to really think first about, when I'm composing, about what's going to be the space for improvisation, what's going to be the environment, and then work backwards from there, as opposed to like writing a melody and some chords, or writing something and then thinking, oh, how are we going to improvise on this? And I've done that too. That works out too sometimes. But I found, for me, it's a little bit more, I usually end up with better results if I kind of think about what the space for improvisation is going to be first, and then sort of have other decisions be a result of that, if that makes sense. It
helps create really unique environments.
Yeah.
Coming at it that way, you know, where your first thought is to the space into which you're going to pour your friends and yourself.
Right.
And then a lot of times that, like, it sounds like maybe that helps dictate the particular specifics of what gets written.
Yeah, I think
around that space.
That's right. Yeah, when it's working well, it kind of works out like that. And it also usually kind of saves me from writing something that's like a little too, you know, is too restrictive, or is too cerebral, or just isn't going to be a good setting because it puts handcuffs on people too much, and isn't really finding that balance of sort of challenging people to discover new sides of what they do, but also letting them do what they do best at the same time.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's so great to hear you say that. But I also think, and I'll bet you'll agree with me about this, is also a way to keep yourself from writing something that you already wrote. To write the same piece over and over, you know, how, as a composer, how do you keep moving and creating, you know, forcing yourself to go into new territory?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, one aspect, I'm sure, of many that you're using to do these things. So you got your postgraduate degree at Columbia, working with George Lewis, and
that's right.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, I did a
Just
master's.
MRI.
I did my master's degree at Wesleyan. I did my undergrad and my master's at Wesleyan, and then I did my doctoral degree at Columbia. Yeah, working with George and Tristan and some other people. Yeah,
It's amazing, and I know you do a lot of teaching as well. Do you
That's
find
right.
that feeds back into your work?
Yeah, I think it does. It's funny listening to that. The interview you did with Jonathan Finlayson, he talks about sort of bringing music to a band and how teaching someone something sort of forces you to clarify your own ideas about it, and teaches you about yourself and your own music. So yeah, I definitely have that experience all the time, and also just learn stuff, period, from students that I work with that I just wasn't aware of or didn't know about. I have a saxophone neck. I have bought a second neck to my saxophone that I installed a pickup on, for different stuff, pitch tracking, and work with computer. And I didn't even know you could do that, really, that you could add a pickup to the neck of a saxophone. But this student of mine had it, and he explained, kind of pointed me how to get it done. And so, yeah, it's great. I'm very lucky, and where I teach at Cal Arts outside of Los Angeles, it's a very, very cool. It's a very cool environment. It's a very creative environment. So
It seems like there's a lot of work crossing boundaries between different disciplines of music and technology that's happening there. Our trumpet festival here in New York, we just had Sarah Bell Reed, who I know is out there doing a lot of really advanced work with, augmented trumpet technologies.
Yeah, she's great. She's a doctoral student. Speaking of doctoral, she's a doctoral student at Cal Arts, and she's great. Yeah, she's doing super, super cool stuff.
Wow. So how big is your course load? Like, how do you keep up with everything else?
That's a good question. I mean, it's pretty manageable, I have to say. Like I usually have 2 really full days every week. Like my Tuesday is kind of packed nonstop, 9 to 5.
So, all right, everybody, don't call Steve on Tuesday.
Don't call me on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, it's the same thing. And they're very, it's a situation where they want me. It's encouraged to be active in your field and touring and writing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of support for that. But I don't know. I mean, it's in terms of when you asked me originally, does my teaching kind of inform my playing? I thought of Jackie McLean, who I studied with for about 5 years when I was at Wesleyan. I kind of would go over to Hart School of Music, which is about 25 minutes away, and work with him. And he's somebody, there's a lot of people, but he's somebody that really was able to create a pretty amazing synergy between his playing, his teaching, his cultural activism. So, I kind of look at that as something to looking forward to, sort of to try at least aspire to. And honestly, I think, well, the hardest thing for me to juggle is being a parent, because I'm trying to be a good parent and be really present, I think, like most people, and really prioritize my kids more than anything else. But still, I got to do what I love, and show them about being passionate about, if you're lucky enough to kind of love what you do for a living. That's important too. But I think I had more, when I lived in New York City for a lot of those years, I had more constraints on my time via like part-time jobs and, doing this and that.
The commute.
Yeah, the commute, sitting on the subway and this, that, and the other. But it's so exciting. Everybody's so hungry, and everybody is really so invested in what they're doing that it kind of works out one way or another. I got lucky and got a lot of support and opportunities for what I was doing at a pretty young age. But yeah, I don't know. It all kind of balances out. I feel like in terms of my time management, I can't complain in terms of like, having to balance everything, but it's tricky,
Do you think being on the West Coast has changed your music?
Nah, not yet. I don't think so. It might. I'm sure it will at some point, but
place isn't that important. Isn't that impactful on you where you're doing your work? Like you spent a lot of time in Paris, and you world, and that.
That's right. I can't tell yet, because I think probably it has to have some impact. But I'm 41. I've been living in LA for about a little over 3 years. And I've probably spent a total of about 3 years living in France in my life, which did have a big impact. And it happened when I was younger too, a lot of that. So I'm not really sure. I feel like it's too early to say. And I'm still kind of looking for opportunities to sort of keep the relationships I've developed over the years with all the people we've been talking about, most of whom are still based on the East Coast, really keep those solid and sound, but also look for ways to sort of set roots here and develop like really meaningful relationships with people based on the West Coast. And it's starting to happen little by little, which is nice, but it just kind of takes a second. Like every when I make a record, or if I play a club for a week, or if I do a tour, it's usually in New York or with people based on the East Coast.
You're out here a lot.
I'm out here a lot. Yeah, that's the other thing. I'm still in New York a lot for concerts, and my mom and my in-laws, everybody's still based in New York. So that's kind of a LA thing though, is like it's very transient. Like it's like a lot of people aren't from here, and even if they are from here, they're sort of gone all summer, or I don't know. So, but yeah, I really like it here. I've been surprised. The thing that surprised me most moving to LA was how similar it is, how much of it reminds me of New York, even though it's so different. But there's so much. It's like it's a big city. Politics are the same. It's right by the ocean. Huge airport. People from all over the world. It's culturally, it's very strong. If I had my druthers, if I could really pick, regardless of where to be based, just for the music I'm involved with, I would probably pick New York City or Philadelphia or something or somewhere near New York.
But I mean, I guess also Cal Arts, having a position there offers certain creative professional opportunities that not a lot of institutions would.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. It's a good setup for me. I kind of like being on the academic calendar, and I like having that. It's just kind of the way I'm built. It's nice for me to have that rhythm. I enjoy it. It's nice to have that steady paycheck, that I can just count on. And yeah, it actually honestly it's freed me up to like do a lot of gigs I want to do just because I want to do them. They're important to me, and not have to worry about, but the Amtrak's going to cost this and da 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 da. So yeah, it's been a cool setup for me.
So this record that you made previous to the one we've been talking about, there must have been a lot of travel involved in that, and there's language involved in that,
right?
Which reflected in all the titles, and it's also like a more electric component.
Right.
Than some of your other projects. I'll just play a little bit of this track that's called Lamb.
Okay.
Is that how you pronounce it?
That's it. And you got it.
You told me in Wolof it means wrestling.
That's right. You got it, 100%.
mooy tax nga xam sa cosaan ñu wéy la sa njàmbaar ba tax na soo nekkoon benn fukk ngay nekk te si biir woy yooyu benn fukk ngay nekk nga xam sa cosaan mooy benn fukk ngay nekk
As times change, my mind frame elevates faster. Self-law and mastery is my aim. My destiny's imminent. Every angle I enter and swarming a pyramid for the here and now. Jews I find under 3/4 water. From flooded streets I was brought up. Now in this era facing the ramifications of blocks under occupation is bars over propaganda. They criminalize the victim, then the truth sets in. Contrasted drastically, faces casted from plastic, smile back wickedly. No mask on, readjusting back happily. Rapidly after tragedy, casually. See that? Now the mask is off, the masquerade is over. Raid is over. Now the mask is off, the masquerade is over. Raid is over. And now the mask is off, the masquerade is over. Raid is over. Now the mask is off, the masquerade is over.
Love that.
Nice.
How do you pronounce the name of this record?
Celebayon. Celebayon. Yeah.
Celebayon.
That's a word in Wolof that's kind of written out in French, and I don't know. Yeah, it means the term Celebayon means intersection in Wolof, and so yeah, that's kind of, you know, that's a title we all agreed on as a group, that would be a good fit. And in the actual hardcover of the CD, there's really lovely liner notes written by a friend of mine, Kwame Coleman, who's a professor at NYU and wonderful pianist, just talking about kind of the group coming together and sort of the broader sort of cultural implications of that, and some of the kind of more darker sort of implications of why people in Senegal speak French in the first place, and kind of touching on that. It's all kind of happens in 1,000 words or something. It's pretty amazing, but only it's relegated for those who have the hard copy CD. But this was a project that also kind of came together organically and not organically. It's also a result of a lot of really long-standing relationships with pretty much everyone on the record. And Priest, or H Prism, the rapper who raps in English and wrote the lyrics in English, he's somebody I've been working with for about 14 years, since about 2005, in all kinds of different contexts. And we had been kind of looking for kind of biding our time, looking for a way to collaborate. And then the other saxophonist and composer on the record, my friend Maciek Lasser, is somebody who had taken a couple lessons with me and asked me to play on an album of his where he had a couple people rapping in Wolof, this group Da Brains. And I just thought it was like a really fresh, really exciting direction that he was taking his music in. And then, you know, we met up at this music technology conference, and it was right around the time they were starting to do these grants, which I think you participated in, if I'm not mistaken, sort of geared towards collaboration between French and American jazz musicians.
Oh, yeah.
So I said, hey, do you want to apply for one of these things? And I don't want to steal your thunder and start, having people rap in Wolof. And he said, no, let's do it. Let's just whatever we can do to kind of move things forward. So we applied for this grant. We got it. And that really is what set us up with the space and time to not just rehearse for a couple of days and meet up in the studio for a day and see what we can do. And that can be cool too. I don't mean to disparage that approach, but for what we had in mind, we really needed more time. So got together in right outside of France, right outside of Paris, in Montreuil for a week, and did some really intense rehearsing. Got together in New York for a week and performed every night at Seeds, which was a little an odd fit, but it was great. It was awesome to do it. And then that was it. That really set us up in a good position to kind of get stuff together. And you got Drew Grass and people I've been working with for almost 20 years in some cases. So it came together really well, and there was a lot of unexpected I tried to learn some Wolof. Thankfully, I speak French because Gaston, his English is getting pretty good. The rapper Gaston Bandimike, who raps in Wolof, his English is getting there, but at the time it was really just Wolof or French. So me speaking French fluently really helped. And then it turned out I didn't realize that both Gaston and Priest, the two rappers, are both Sufi Muslims. So they ended up having a lot in common and actually being able to understand each other's lyrics as well, to especially the kind of references to spirituality. So it was one of those things that came together really, really nicely for us, which was great.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. So I'm sure you have like a million new projects going on and things coming up that you're working on that we're all going to get to hear at some point. Is there anything in particular that you want to talk about?
Sure. I mean,
I know that's a little bit of a broad question.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do. I mean, I don't have so many things, but the main things on my plate right now is this group Celebeon. We just got another one of these French-American Jazz Exchange grants. They're a lot smaller than they used to be, which I think is good because that means more people get to participate. So we're going to get a second book of music together. I got commissioned by the sort of French national big band, the ONJ, Orchestre Nationale de Jazz, to write a sort of evening length piece for them. With sort of in collaboration with EarCam, so it'll have some significant electronic elements that'll happen maybe about a little over a year from now. That's kind of the lion's share of it, and then just kind of this trio album with Craig just came out, so we'll be doing a bunch of touring sort of around that.
Cool.
Yeah, kind of.
Well, I hope we'll be seeing you in New York.
I hope so too.
Continue, that you don't get all consumed by Los Angeles and the West Coast, beautiful sun and sand and.
I know it's very attractive, and it's interesting. I was talking to Peter Evans, I was texting with him, and he was saying, he said, by the way, I moved to Lisbon, and I said, oh, cool. Like, yeah, I get the feeling that's sort of happening. Like people are moving out of the city. Maybe it's just the age that we are. And he said, no, I still have all my bands and all that stuff in New York. That's still going. And I said, yeah, me too. That's what I mean. Everybody's kind of like, there's a lot of people that aren't living in New York City, but functioning as if they do without too much of a ripple. It depends for everybody.
Well, right. But just like this conversation we're having, technology facilitates a lot of this.
That's exactly right. The technology helps. And there's sort of more and more, Justin Brown and Gerald Clayton and Jeff Parker and Chris Speed, and there's getting to be a little bit more of a critical mass in LA.
Mark Juliana move out there recently too.
That would be great.
I may be spreading a false rumor.
Spreading a rumor. I don't know. That would be very welcome as far as I'm concerned to have him out here. It's one of those things. Like I grew up on the East Coast, so that's sort of like maybe always feels like a little bit more like home. But my kids are kind of in charge right now, and they like it here, so I can adjust.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for making the time to talk to me too. I mean, I really appreciate that you came on.
Yeah, it's nice to catch up for a second. It's cool.
Time is a premium.
That's right.
It was great to hear about the music and to really do a little bit of a dive into listening to it.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Thank you for the work. It's so important and so wonderful, especially in these times that we're going through.
Yes.
With what's in the news, the fact that we continue to hold on to our culture and humanity and fight for it is really everything. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great talking to you.
See you later.
We're going out with Postlude from the new record.
Sounds
good. You approve?
I approve. It sounds
good.
Okay,
thank you, Steve.
All right, Dave.
Au revoir. Au revoir. À bientôt.
Okay. That's very good. Very good. All right, I'll see you later.
That's the music of Steve Lehman. This is Dave Douglas. Once again, you're listening to the Greenleaf Music Podcast. Thanks for listening all the way through, and please do come and join us as a subscriber at greenleafmusic.com. Thanks.